A few of you have no doubt heard me say that I never owned a Sega Saturn. It's true. The best memory I have of the Sega Saturn is receiving a cheaply made promotional VHS tape in the mail. Watched it several times over, and I was really jacked about what I was seeing, particularly as someone who was really into Sega arcade games like Virtua Fighter and Daytona. And then, I don't know what happened really. I had heard about the Sony PlayStation coming out about the same time, and I decided to wait it out and just see which of the two succeeded. I had just unloaded a ton of complete in-box NES carts to help pay for a Panasonic 3DO, and hell, that system should hold me over into the next generation anyways, right? I eventually bought a PlayStation a few years later, and I never did circle back to buy a Saturn. In those days, it was a lot to commit to even one system, let alone consider having two. Still, to this day though, I've never owned a Saturn, and I've never really even played on one other than a few minutes at the kiosks at Babbage's or Electronics Boutique. But I always felt bad about that, maybe even regretted it a little bit. And then someone reminded me that I could still show the Saturn a little love by picking up its arcade counterpart, the STV. The STV, or Sega Titan video game system, was released in 1995. If you're like me, you may only recall one prominent arcade title associated with the STV, Die Hard Arcade. The Die Hard arcade machines were seemingly everywhere around this time, and they were tough to miss. Rather than being made from wood like almost every other US machine at the time, these were a black molded plastic. I didn't necessarily love it, and I thought it looked cheap at the time, but here in 2020, I look back on it a little more favorably, and I kind of like that it's different from the other arcade cabinets of that time period. It's kind of like a nod to the old Williams Duramolds. As I noted earlier, the hardware is largely similar to that of the Sega Saturn and features dual Hitachi SH2 chips for processing power. Really, the primary difference between this system and the Saturn is that this loads its games off cartridges, whereas the Saturn obviously uses discs. I wasn't really shopping for an STV setup, but a good deal popped up for this board and cart, and that cart is, unsurprisingly, the extremely common Die Hard Arcade. But that's okay, as it's the game I'm most familiar with, and one that I will admittedly still play. The STV also adheres to the JAMA standard, which means it's plug and play with my atrocity or any JAMA wired machine. Note that some titles will use an additional kick harness, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in a bit. The final thing that intrigued me about this hardware was that I knew a MultiCard existed for it. In fact, it's one of the older MultiCarts that Darksoft worked on and was released more than 5 years ago. So this is another shining example of being able to play an entire library on one board. Don't assume you're limited to just one game if you buy an arcade machine. There are options out there to get you playing many others on original hardware. Alright, so I just gave away the first thing you should consider grabbing if you want to pimp your Sega STV, the Darksoft MultiCart. And look at this thing, it's even got its memory chips at a 45-degree angle for some added sass. It's a cool looking board. Unlike the MultiCart for the CPS3, where I felt comfortable leaving it bare due to the metal casing, this one was a little more worrisome, just hanging out there with no protection, so I bought a green shell for this one from highscoresave.com. As you can see, I also printed a label on some vinyl sticker paper to complete the look. Functionality-wise, this one is a little different than a few of the others out there. Out of the box, you have to select games on the STV Multi by using jumpers on top of the cart. This isn't difficult, in fact it's pretty easy, but it's not nearly as convenient as the LCD selector used for the CPS2 Multi. There are of course clever workarounds for this that people have made to extend the jumpers to a box that you can store in your control panel, and then of course an aftermarket LCD selector that will require a little bit of reading and work to get up and running. For now, I'm pretty satisfied with just using the jumpers on the top of the cart, but I wouldn't rule out an upgrade in the future. One final note on the cart, it will indeed run Batman Forever, but since that game required an additional soundboard for the STV, well, you guessed it, no audio unless you have that soundboard. Still, here's the preferred workaround for that when playing this game. Okay, this next one may have deserved a video all on its own. This is the Acrylic Plate set by Lions 3, cut and etched for your STV board. This is absolutely gorgeous. It's very similar to the awesome Ultimate MK3 plates that I showed off already, but here is Lions 3 coming through for the Titan. What I like about these is not only do they look super sharp, but they offer protection for bare boards, especially the undersides where these things tend to get scraped and nicked, even when you're being careful. I also like the idea of having boards mounted to help prevent warping that can occur from having them loose and laying about. It's generally advisable to store your boards vertically if possible, but this doesn't look near as awesome as this. Lions 3 makes plates and products for a number of different types of arcade hardware, including the Neo Geo. Definitely head to his site and see what he has to offer. These kits are truly amazing and very worthwhile. Next to upgrade to pimp that STV a little further is a Multibios. My board had the original European BIOS on it, and I wanted to swap that out for the Multibios. This is a free download from, man, I'm gonna butcher this. I'll say jobberg.com, maybe? Regardless, it's a free download. You burn it to a 27C400 chip or erase and rewrite your original chip, pop it back onto the board, and off you go. When you power on, just hold down the button that corresponds to the region you want to play in, and you're off and running. While most carts and games will work with all regions, there are some exceptions and differences when certain games are run in different region settings. A good example is Radiant Silvergun. It will play in all regions, but the control scheme is dumbed down if it's run with the US or European BIOS. Similar to some other hardware systems, in-game text can change for some titles based on the region selected. You also have lockouts like columns that then won't run on the US BIOS, and some other variances as well. So in short, you can bypass all of that and do what you want by being able to select the BIOS region you want to play your games under just by doing this essentially free upgrade. The final item to pimp your STV is this sweet add-on board from EVERTEN. No soldering required, it slides right into the existing connectors on the board, and assembly is completed by connecting one JST cable. When added, this will give you stereo RCA jacks, and remember, I mentioned kick harnesses. Well, this allows you to use a CPS1 or CPS2 kick harness with the STV. And this is great because I have to think most arcade players are likely already going to have one of those too. In fact, what makes this add-on especially helpful to me is that it is now super easy to use the STV inside of my Capcom Big Blue. Can use the newly added RCA jacks to plug right into the amplifier already in the cabinet, and since this is already equipped with a CPS2 kick harness, boom, that plugs right in as well. At $25 shipped, the flexibility this little board gives you is really great. Even if you're not placing this inside of a cabinet, it makes consoleization easier by doing the audio work for you, and it also likely prevents you from having to purchase yet another kick harness, which is probably already over half the cost of this add-on if you're not making them yourself. And that's the way to pimp your Sega STV, kids. I think if I was going to do one more thing, it would obviously be to add the LCD or another type of remote selector for the MultiCart, but overall, I think I came a long way on my STV in a pretty short time period. As I mentioned, the hardware for this is still relatively cheap. I got the board and the die-hard cart for $130 shipped, which isn't bad at all by today's standards. If you're thinking about getting on the Titan train, it might be a good time to do so before this creeps up like everything else has. Hope you liked this arcade-centric video. No, I mean, I hope you liked it. Click the thumbs up if you would be so kind. Subscribe if you'd like to stick around for more arcade and Neo Geo nonsense. Please comment and share your own thoughts on the Sega Titan, and I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.